My name's Phil Dover. I'm an Englishman, actually, who lives and works in the United States. I've been at Babson College, actually, for about the last 25 years. Babson's sort of an interesting place. Babson is perhaps, well, is in fact ranked as the premier school in the world, business school, for the study of entrepreneurial studies. And we've had that ranking now for the last 15 years, and it's a remarkable entrepreneurial challenge because schools like Harvard and Stanford and MIT are pouring absolutely colossal amount of money into the entrepreneurial space. And it remains remarkable that Babson, which is a very small school on the outskirts of Boston, about 12 miles west of Boston, in a little town called Wellesley, can remain as the leader of that area, that topic of endeavor. And I think we do it by focus. I mean, there's a lesson here for all of us, I think, and that is niche marketing for small companies is extraordinarily important. And that, you know, I teach a lot of executives, and I warn them about what I call the peanut butter approach. And anyone, any idea what peanut butter is? Have you seen what peanut butter is? It's a disgusting American product that you spread thinly over bread. And the idea of peanut butter is that you do spread it all across a piece of bread. And the idea of peanut butter is that you give, you know, resources, the same resources to everything. So my, you know, observation over years and years of working with all sizes of corporation is that most companies have too many products chasing too many markets. And that being a niche player then is absolutely essential. And I think that's why Babson is as good as what it is at what it does. So I'm going to share just a couple of things with you. I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit here, but I want to talk about two things. The first thing I want to talk about really is how we understand this concept of entrepreneurship, because I think it's a constantly evolving concept. I always remember the most famous sort of expression about entrepreneurship came from George Bush, and many of you will have heard of this. And he said, and he actually did say this, how can you trust a nation that does not have a word for entrepreneurship? A wonderful, you know, George Bushism, if you can remember what George Bush was like as a president. So consequently, what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about this evolution of entrepreneurship and how we see it, and a little bit about how we teach it. And then secondly, how we take that data and we use it, hopefully, in the real world to stimulate successful companies. And so this gets us into the concept of the ecosystem. It gets us into the work that you're doing at Nottingham and the like. I was going to try to do this if I can. Just bear with me a second. Maybe I can't. Sorry about this. I've done this previously. No, I'll leave it. I was going to try to make the automatic thing work, but we'll just do it this way. So, entrepreneurship. Again, we go back to Peter Drucker, perhaps the most famous management guru who ever lived. Entrepreneurship is not magic. It is not mysterious, and it has nothing to do with genes. It's back to this concept of nature versus nurture. Are you born an entrepreneur, or can you become an entrepreneur? Like any discipline, it can be learned. I think we have to be a little bit careful here. Definition of entrepreneurship, classical one, the identification, evaluation, and exploitation of opportunities. But the one that I like better is the one underneath that, and I'll come back and I'll show you why, for me, this is important. It's the creation of value by growing or scaling an enterprise. And as we'll see, this concept of scaling becomes, from an economic perspective, a macro perspective, extremely important. So, again, nature versus nurture. There's no question that as we sit and I look out into this room, that some of you will make better entrepreneurs than others. I can teach you as much as you like about entrepreneurship, but you won't become particularly good entrepreneurs. You're not creative, you're not imaginative, you don't work well with others, whatever it is. I could study accounting forever, and I would never be a good accountant. So consequently, we can teach you so far, you can learn so far. And I think the process of learning becomes extremely important, and I want to come back to that, about how we do it. Do we do it in the classroom, or do we do it outside the classroom? And as you'll find, I'm a great exponent for doing most of it outside of the classroom. So we've got this nature versus nurture. We decide that, there is some nurture involved here. So if we go on a historic trip of the study, if you like, of entrepreneurship, and think about, look at the left-hand side. I should have really put these, coming up in order, but I didn't have time to do that. If you look at the left-hand side, much of our work on entrepreneurship started with trait theory. That is, we would look and say, what are the characteristics, the major characteristics of people who are likely to be successful entrepreneurs? This is the who question. And again, hardly surprising, we came up with need for achievement, internal locus of control. That means we're in control of our own actions. We're not having someone else telling us what to do. High risk-taking propensity, and tolerance for ambiguity. And it's hard to argue against those. But what happened was that, in subsequent studies, it was very hard to replicate this data. So you did studies, and in fact, we found all sorts of characteristics that entrepreneurs had, not just these characteristics here. So the trait theory became sort of hard to validate. And so consequently, the profession 10, 15 years ago moved on to what is called the sort of process approach to entrepreneurship. That is, there's a sequence of stages that we pass through. If any of you have done new product development, it's called the stage gate process. And we pass through a sequence of stages, and you can see those stages here. And really the question is more, what do we do rather than who does it? And that's pretty good. I mean, this works fairly well. But what we find is it works fairly well in certain circumstances. And those circumstances then become very important, because this process-based approach is only useful at certain times. So let's look at what those are, if we can. So actually we've moved now on to, let's say, a new stage of thinking about entrepreneurship. And it's really called entrepreneurial cognition. That what we should really be doing is not the how or the what that or the who or the what, that we talked about before. We're now interested in the how, in covering patterns about how entrepreneurs think. The specific ways that we need to think in order to gain competitive advantage. How can an individual become entrepreneurial, create opportunities, and act on them? And as you'll see, we'll call this the entrepreneurial mindset. How can we create within an individual this entrepreneurial mindset, this way of sort of thinking entrepreneurial, becoming, as we like to call it, opportunity obsessed. So, okay, here's where this gets interesting, and why I think the models that we've looked at to date are not fully applicable. We face in any situation a continuum of predictability. If we go back to classic process approach to entrepreneurship, what you had was an end that you were looking for and a certain number of means, they be factors, skills, expertise, funding, etc. A certain number of means that you could get to that end. But you knew what that end was. And that's the left-hand side of this document. That's the predictable known side. So often this is called incremental innovation. We're adding to existing products. We add design, as a critical component of laptops, desktops, tablets, whatever. But the reality is that what we've got, wrong computer, is that increasingly we've got an unpredictable environment. We're dealing with situations that, in fact, we can't predict. So there's a great deal of the unknown that we're working with as entrepreneurs. If we're looking for radical new ideas, we're looking at imaginative ways to look at new markets, like Jan was in his past presentation, then we face this situation as entrepreneurs that's a hell of a lot of the world that we exist in that we haven't got a clue as to what's going to happen. It's unknown territory. And so clearly we need different models and different approaches to looking at this world. So what do? I've got the predictable, and there's many things that are predictable. A lot of, Jan's gone now, but a lot of his consumer packaged goods are relatively predictable. That's why the B2B world is a very different world to the B2C world. And so the predictable world, Google Maps, the GPS university, you're never lost. You know where you are, you know where you're going, it's just how well you operationalize and execute that. It's less a question of strategy and more a question of implementation and execution. But the reality is that, again, we face a lot of this situation. What logic works best when things are very unpredictable? We've got markets that are changing at warp speed. Much of my work is I'm a B2B specialist. So I work, for example, a great deal in medical devices. And the growth of a thing called wearable electronics is a huge movement inside the medical business. That is, we take, for example, monitoring out of the intensive care unit and put it actually on the human being in their own home. It's a way of monitoring your vital signs, et cetera, et cetera. But what logic best then, when things are unpredictable, what's the best logic that we can follow? And in this situation, our role as an entrepreneur changes. From predicting the future, if I can predict the future, I can develop products which are in line with those forecasts, to in fact creating the future. That is, I'm creating new markets. I'm creating the need for new products, etc., etc. Okay? So, our argument is then, you can't think your way out of an unknowable future. I can sit as the gentleman sitting under the tree, Isaac Newton, and wait for this wonderful brainstorm. But if I don't know what's going to happen in a market, what I've got to do is hopefully try to stimulate the changes in the marketplace that I'd like to see take place. So the only logical thing to do, the process-based approach, we've become obsessed with analysis. It is, we sit down, we take a market, we analyze the market, we determine its size, we determine its growth trends, we determine who the players are in it, we look at market share, we look at margin, the likelihood of gaining different levels of margin, etc., etc. But again, many situations that we're in, we can't do that. So the logical thing to do then is to act first. So that sort of turns, really, our activities, in a sense, on their head. We're saying to be a successful entrepreneur, we need to take action. Windows of opportunity are small, are short, and that we've got to move quickly in order to be able to exploit them. But obviously, if you're going to act, you've got to act smartly. And a whole set of questions, I'll just put them up here, that we'd start to ask for ourselves would be, where are we now? What do we know in terms of what the consumer is looking at? What help do we have at hand? All issues that you've seen already this morning. The idea of working with others who can help us. The idea, there's three critical components of this. Empathy, that is the idea of deep insights about consumers, that is using qualitative rather than quantitative research. There is visualization, which is having an idea and then thinking in terms of brainstorming, the ideos type of activity in which we sort of visualize the interaction of the product with potential market segments. And finally, experimentation. And you could almost argue most importantly, experimentation. That what we need to be doing with any new idea is, as we say here, small steps. Take small steps, try it, test it, learn from it. So the model then becomes act, learn, build. And it's an iterative process. And so, again, this is very much driving now our own philosophy at Babson. I was going to give you an example of this in just a second. Just bear with me a moment, if I can find where that example is. Okay. So we've got act, learn, build. So we've got two models, if you like. And some of the components of the act, learn, and build are here. It contrasts with prediction, favored very much by entrepreneurs, 89% in our calculations. Smart action trumps analysis, etc. So we've got two models then. The prediction model, we're certainly not going to do without that. But my point is, our point is that it will only cover a limited amount of the activity that we will try to undertake in the marketplace. And the second is act, learn, build. Okay? And so I just wanted to show you this has implications then for teaching. How do we teach this type of stuff? Well, we teach it very much by operationalizing it, by not talking, well, some theory, definitely, but talking mainly through examples. And I thought I'd just show you, if I could, I'm just going to have to get out of this and find the right example. An example of this, bear with me. Where did I put it here? This is Babson's sort of model then of teaching entrepreneurship. And it's in this, those of you who are interested, in this absolutely fabulous book called Teaching Entrepreneurship. It's a brand new book. And so what we've got here, if we can look at this then, is we've got the concept of creation, the role of creativity, experimentation, we've talked about this before, the practice of play. And I just want to show you an example of this, a free and imaginative mind. We ought to start with that free and imaginative mind. And the whole concept of empathy. Unless you can get that deep insight into the psyche, the pain points, whatever you want to call them, the customer experience, the customer journey, then you're somewhat lost. So here's an example. And this is the type of thing that we would do at Babson. We would start, by the way, with giving you an exercise of doing two things. Either you could have the choice of doing a jigsaw or putting these little pieces of cloth together and putting them together in a sort of mosaic. Stop and think about this. The jigsaw is an example of what type of logic? It's predictive logic. Putting the mosaic together, right, is causal logic. And so we have to take a very different mindset approach to those two challenges. So we now have this challenge. If we wanted to make rain in this room right now, how could this be accomplished? So you would come up with ideas like, well, I'd put a set of papers on the floor, I'd set fire to them, and I'd get the sprinklers in the roof to create water. I'd go out and get a bucket of water and I'd throw it all over the place. You'd come up with all sorts of, let me say, physical ideas. And again, our minds are set in that way. How do I create rain? It's a physical phenomenon. But let me show you how, in fact, another way of doing this. And again, what I do is to put you all in a circle, and I'd simply ask you, I'd be in that circle, and ask you to follow my actions. Right? So let me just show you what this looks like. I hope it works. What this looks like. Please work. There we go. What do I limit? Can I get more sound? What people are doing at this time are rubbing their hands together. Now they're clicking. You might want to do it yourself, right? Now you're tapping your knees. Now I'm stamping on the ground. So there you are. There you have it. So how do I get back? Again, I can't read the, how do I get back to my presentation? Which one do I press? This one? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so just let me go back to where we were. So, can you see what we're doing here? What we've done is opened your mind up. Why should creating rain in a room be simply a physical activity? Why can't it be a function of sound? And so consequently, just by doing that exercise, I've hopefully opened up your your mind, and potentially your creative juices. So that's just one of many examples. This book is packed with examples of exercises like this that you can do with your own students. So great stuff, great stuff. I just go back to where we were. Okay. So we got the two types of logic, if you like, and we add prediction to that, and taken together they form what we call entrepreneurial thought and action. Prediction and action, learn, build as the two essential models that we will, or the basic building blocks that we'll use for developing the entrepreneurial process. Okay? So, and again, it's very linked to, many of you will be familiar with the Ansoff matrix or the product market matrix, which is a very popular strategic matrix in terms of how does an organization grow. It grows through growing its markets, it grows through growing its products. And what you find here is that what we've got is, in fact, many of the entrepreneurs will be in this space here. And you see that underneath the create revolutionary, we've got suicide quadrant. And that means that by far is the most dangerous, the most risky area to be involved, because you're moving away from your market knowledge and you're moving away from your core product or technology knowledge. But again, I just want to make the point that there's a link, obviously, between innovation and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs can act in any of these spaces, but they do have a proclivity to be most involved here, unusual in their comfort and preference with this quadrant. And you can see that it's a far smaller percentage than the other quadrants in the growth matrix. So this brings me to a point, and the point is that as I think about entrepreneurship, it's not about startups, although that is obviously an integral part of it. Entrepreneurship can take place in any organization, no matter what size. And so that's the point I want to get to, that really for me, the most important thing as we think about the entrepreneurial space is its relationship to the concept of growth. And that's where I want to go to now. So let me just go on. What are our leaders? This is Barack Obama and David Cameron. What are our leaders mistelling us? Small business is the backbone of our economy. New business is the lifeblood of a healthy economy. These two statements have something in common. They're both wrong, or at best, misleading. So why is that so? Well, let's just, as I say, play the devil's advocate. For a booming economy, we need high growth firms, not small businesses. If I'm looking at this from a Spanish perspective, an English perspective, a German perspective, then I need to think about how can I deal with the problems of unemployment? How can I deal with the issues of, sort of using and fertilizing young minds? Well, not necessarily young minds, but any minds. So the literature consistently shows that a very small number, from 1 to 6% of all ventures in the region, account for most of the net job creation from entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship does not lead to job creation. Most small businesses fail. Most small businesses say very small. High growth firms are neither what we normally think of as startups or small businesses. The average age of high growth ventures averages 15 to 30 years. Think about Amazon. Think about eBay. How long did it take those organizations, incredibly entrepreneurial organizations, to in fact start to really generate positive net flow, cash flow? And high growth ventures are more prevalent in basic industries rather than in ICT and life sciences. So those are sort of interesting issues, rather worrying issues. Small is not always beautiful. Sadly, and I'm afraid I had to pick on you, the true enemy of growth for firms is stagnation, of starting something and it going nowhere. And the reality is that most small businesses are stagnant. And I see this time and time and time again. I feel terrible for the students who set up these businesses, because they're either Me Too businesses or someone else has got there before them, or they can't wait the period of time it takes from inception to the hockey stick, the start of significant growth, often 4 to 5 years. The resources run out before they can get there. And so consequently what you see is, if I look at the countries on the left that have more than 40% in small businesses and have less than 10 people working on average in those businesses, they're countries like Italy, Greece, Portugal, and Spain. If I look at the countries on the right, they have less than 20% in small businesses. This is not an argument for not doing small businesses, by the way. It's an argument for balance. It's an argument that growth should be the driver of what we do, as opposed to being obsessed about this concept of entrepreneurship. So if we look at the UK, Switzerland, Germany, New Zealand, GNP much more robust. You know, Germany has the concept of the Mittelstand, which is the small, medium-sized business. Immensely successful. Why? Why does it work so well? I have a client called Phoenix in Germany, and it makes these little things that you put on, what are they called? They're connectors that you would put on a computer, that you would put on a telegraph pole, that you would put in a television. I mean, they're a niche, a boring, non-sexy niche market. But they do it better than anyone else in the world. And they're a multi-billion-dollar company. Because they've found that niche, and still a family-owned company, by the way. They've found that niche in which to operate. So consequently, you know, be careful here. You know, what is it that we want? Do we want to start a lot of new businesses? Or do we want to start a number of businesses that hopefully will grow and contribute to the economy fairly quickly? And again, as is noted at the bottom, and you know this, it is also known that owners and workers in small businesses work longer hours, make lower wages, and have fewer benefits, and also have terrible social lives. So consequently, be careful. Be careful. Okay? So, sadly, startups don't create many new jobs or innovate a great deal. And again, I am painting deliberately a black picture because there is obviously an obverse side to any coin. But we have to be careful. And again, you can see the examples here of the very small number of startups that become successful, and also the very small amount of true innovation as measured by copyright, trademark, or patent applications. And this data is all, I believe, OECD data. So economic growth causes firm formation and subsequent expansion, be it a startup or an existing business. So again, as I think as we teach entrepreneurship, we should be conscious of these things. Hopefully you've seen some ideas about ways in which we can create a more stimulating, imaginative, creative class. And what we need is what you started to play with here, which is the idea of the ecosystem. That entrepreneurs on their own have very little chance of success. What they need is a support system. Oh, by the way, for those of you who are interested about this growth of the act, learn, build approach, there are two very strong conceptual approaches. Well, one is called effectuation theory, or effectuation formation, and the other is what's called design thinking. And there was a Harvard Business Review recently which was dominated by the concept of design thinking. And for those of you who would like a copy of my slides, there is an appendix in the slide that talks about those two conceptual, if you like, theoretical underpinnings, because they are essential to understand as you think about carefully using the act, build, learn approach. So we go back to this, though. It's the ecosystem. And so what we need then, if we're going to be a successful entrepreneur, is a hell of a lot of support systems. And you can see them all here. What we need in the circle is obviously policy. Most of that is public policy. It will be government regulations, taxation systems, and the like. Finance, obviously, is critical. Having the right culture, having the right people as part of your startup team or your ramp-up team. Appropriate support structures, be they educational institutions, be they banks, be they whatever, human capital, and obviously the appropriate markets and the ability to understand those markets. And so what I've got around the outside then is what we perceive as being the important components that will provide us with these much needed assets or resources in the center which will allow us to be truly entrepreneurial. And again, what I've done for you is just giving you a few examples of what would be contained within the various components, the various variables within the ecosystem. So, just take a couple. If you're going to be successful, you need early customers, the whole concept of an early win, early adopters for proof of concept, reference customers, absolutely essential. And again, you can read these yourself. I mean, there's nothing too surprising here, but it's the interface. It's the public-private partnership that is so important. I don't know how many of you have done any business in Finland, but there is an organization called Sitra in Finland, which again is an interface between the institutes of technology, the country's banks, and the government. They work together to make Finland one of this little country up in the northernmost reaches of Europe, one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. And again, it's because we've built, as Jan said, these networks. So again, we could elaborate at length on each of these. But what we're looking for is to build that infrastructure that allows us to operate effectively. We can't do it ourselves. We can't do it just with the team we've created. We need outside public and private sources to act as a catalyst. Okay? So let me give you a couple of examples. What is believed to be the most successful city in Britain is sadly not Nottingham, although they're doing well. It is Cambridge. And Cambridge really does some things just extraordinarily well. If you were to study this ecosystem concept in Cambridge, you'd find some of these things. A real marriage of academia, private money, and entrepreneurial savvy. So, for example, the professors use their students continuously as a source of assistance in their new product ideas. You've got the most exciting technology cluster in Europe. But the important point that within that technology cluster are not just small businesses, are people like Microsoft, Apple, AstraZeneca, and a whole host of other big companies. For these ecosystems to work well, you need a smattering of medium to large businesses who can act as a resource for mentoring, for sources of funds, for swapping of personnel, whatever it might be. The largest incubator in the United States, perhaps the world, is a place called Cambridge Innovation, and it sits in the heart of the MIT campus. And this is an incubator for small businesses. And in that incubator are companies like Apple and Microsoft and others who want to be there because they want to experience the vibes, the dynamism, the excitement, the enthusiasm, the passion, whatever we want to call it, that those small businesses bring. And it becomes then a win-win situation of them sharing ideas with each other. So again, remember, entrepreneurs aren't just small businesses. They exist, hopefully, in large businesses as well. You know, it's another story as to how we generate effective entrepreneurial action in large businesses, which we hopefully could talk about some other time. So what happens with Cambridge authorities, public policy aspect of it? Most politicians want to get involved, don't they? Most politicians want to tell you what type of products you should be developing. The Cambridge authorities don't. They've managed to keep their finger out of the pie, and their goal is, in fact, to create the most conducive environment for success. Make sure there's no traffic jams. Make sure that there's a good train service to London. Make sure that the logistics system works well. And so what they're doing is creating the space around these companies that will allow, or at least contribute to them, to being successful. So the politicians aren't involved in making entrepreneurial decisions. They're involved in creating the entrepreneurial environment. Okay? So much of Cambridge genius then is off balance sheet. Mentoring, student involvement, tremendous amount of cross-discipline interaction. Policymakers that take an interest in long-term requirements of the local economy. So the politicians interested in sustainability rather than helping you bring your new product to market. So interesting stuff. You can probably tell me more about this one than I can. This is yours. And this is the little bit that I've picked up on it. You know, the creative industry ecology, the creative quarter in Nottingham. I did my undergraduate work in Nottingham, so I know the city quite well. And what I could find is lack of research to date on complex ecology of creative enterprises and institutional actors. So not a great deal known about the sort of interactions that we are familiar with in the Cambridge situation. But creative business clusters enjoy collaborative advantage, people to talk to work together as they gain access to formal targeted business development and learning opportunities, plus peer networking and cooperation. So a great deal of interaction. Again, there apparently seems to be the importance of empathy, visualization, and experimentation, this idea of bringing an idea, a new product to market, and iterating it, experimenting with it over time to make it successful. And the point I've been making throughout is seemed to be what you're doing so well in Nottingham. Formal taught learning about entrepreneurship and creative industry clusters should be largely replaced by mentoring, activity-based learning, and peer support. And again, that's the stuff that I showed you a little earlier. So, in summary then, you know, just try to pull what I've been talking about together. Key lessons from regional entrepreneurship ecosystems need to focus on metro regions. They have to be sizable regions like Barcelona, like Nottingham. Need multi-domain influences to set entrepreneurship as a priority. It's not enough simply for us to have a passion as an entrepreneurship. We need to have support from many different public and private entities. We need access to education, especially activity-based pursuits, the type of thing that we talked about earlier. Teaching entrepreneurship is a million miles away from teaching economics or finance or the dreaded accountancy. We need access to other usable assets, and we need access to new markets. So, for example, Cambridge is very close to the center of a lot of sort of health science, health industry activities. and so consequently they can get quick access to markets to test their new products and new ideas with. Need for connectors or champions, high-status individuals who catalyze, facilitate. They need not be the entrepreneur themselves. They could be someone like, for example, Boris Johnson as the Mayor of London, providing the structure that is necessary to create this ecosystem. The need to get quick wins to generate high visibility, media attention to success. And again, this idea of quick wins is so important. As an entrepreneur, what you need is to get something out there that catches attention quickly. It may not sell a tremendous amount, but it gets publicity and allows you the revenue, the attention, etc., to move to whatever. And remember, it's not the first, it's the second product that's the hardest to generate as an entrepreneur. And finally, really, if growth is, at the end of the day, our driving motivation, then the focus should not be on startups, important as they are. The focus has to be on scale-ups. I've actually just come back from Lebanon. I was working in Lebanon with the Bank of Lebanon and the British government. Very interesting idea. Lebanon, perhaps the most technology-savvy Arab country in the world. Population of 3.5 million people. Lots of startups, but with a home market of 3.5 million, where are you going? So what the British government is doing is saying, okay, we arguably, along with New York, have the financial center of the world, so we'd like you, in fact, to bring your technology platform to London and use it as a launching pad, the scale-up component for the globalization of your products. So very clever, very sort of interesting. So for me, I find myself spending much more time now, less on startups and much more time on scale-ups. That is, taking the business and trying to stimulate growth that will add jobs, add revenue, add margins, add income, and these critical issues. So I've covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time, but I hope you found it interesting, rather, sort of maybe a slightly different perspective on what you've seen before. Gives you a sense of what we're trying to do at Babson. We've got some unbelievably bright people working on these things. But again, it underlines for me that, you've got to think differently about entrepreneurship. There is a different mindset required to be successful within that space. And hopefully these few slides gave you ideas as to what they may be. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.